All right, hello and welcome to the North Dakota Department of Mineral Resources Director's Cut. Today we have Lynn Helms, Director of Department of Mineral Resources, and Justin Kringstead, North Dakota Pipeline Authority Director. Please let us know in the chat if you're having any issues hearing us, and feel free to submit questions there as well. All right, Lynn, go ahead.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for tuning in. We're talking about October and November production numbers. So I'll look back, as it always is, and appreciate your tuning in. We've got quite a bit of information to share this afternoon. So for starters, we did see a decline in oil production, a moderate decline, more than likely the result of the November winter weather that we experienced. It was just over 2% decline in oil production. Happy to report that it remained above, almost 10% above the revenue forecast. So in terms of state revenues exceeding that. So about a 2% decline in oil production. Interestingly enough, a 4% decline in natural gas production. And so once again, I think this is 3 months in a row we've seen a decline in the gas oil ratio. And that is something none of us really expected. I don't think it changes the long-term trend, but we have seen a migration of drilling activity out of the core into the Tier 2 and Tier 3 areas as the advent of 3-mile laterals and more drilling by some of our independent oil and gas companies out in those Tier 2 and Tier 3 areas has picked up. I think it's probably approaching half of our drilling rigs now that are outside the core. We're seeing at least a temporary flattening of that gas oil ratio curve. So that is an interesting paradigm that we'll keep an eye on. Also want to point out that for the first time in many months, New Mexico saw a significant decline. Not sure that it's a trend yet. There was similar activity in the fall and winter of 2021. So it may just be a seasonal thing in parts of New Mexico. Is too soon to tell. Their peak production at this point was 1.625 million barrels a day. So we keep track of that. It'll be interesting to see. We'll know when they plateau or begin a slow decline that New Mexico has matured like the Bakken. And so that's kind of why we keep an eye on it. Oil price is still pretty strong, down about $5 a barrel from what we reported a month ago, and but still more than 50% above revenue forecast. So the revenue for state and local government is still greatly exceeding what the forecast was for the 2021-2023 biennium, which we've still got 5.5 months to go. So you heard, if you listened in, the revenue forecast. The legislature is now working on an updated revenue forecast, trying to look forward into the 2023-2025 biennium. It sounds pretty flat. And so what they heard from S&P and what we're hearing from Moody's are similar, that concerns about world economic activity in 2023 really looked like a recession and very flat production and prices in 2023 with maybe some uptick in 24 and that first half of 25. So that's what we're building into our forecasts and what we're projecting going forward. Very strong activity in the drilling permit area. And so that's a real positive indicator for next year. Now, it's going to take strong drilling and completion activity to maintain our million barrels a day or 1.1 million barrels a day. So it's encouraging to see that our rig count is back up to 43, and permit activity has picked up very substantially, with 94 permits being issued in the month of December. We also saw a little bit of a downtick in wells drilled but not completed, but nothing significant there yet. That activity really is anticipated come this next spring and summer when the gas capture for those areas where the duck wells are located really is up and running. Normal uptick in active wells for the winter. We have a lot of stripper wells. It was interesting. I asked about that today. I was asked a question about someone called them marginal wells. We've got 8,000 active marginal wells in this state. So almost half of our wells qualify for stripper well or marginal well status. So when a well is like that and we get major snow events like we had in November, and we'll talk about December, it's not economic to plow the snow and keep the well on. And so oftentimes they're shut in for a good portion of the winter. So nothing to be alarmed about there. That's normal seasonal activity. And the completions were way up, a very strong completion month in December. So all of that happened prior to, in the first half, really, prior to those two significant snowstorm events and the cold weather that we had. As we start to look forward to what we're going to talk about next month, I really want to caution people, not to panic or be alarmed, but we saw the December blizzards reduce production down to what we think was almost half in the 600,000 barrel a day range. And it took a while to respond. As we talked about last month, it really took until well into January before we saw production really recover, and we're still not back at 1.1 million barrels a day based on what we're seeing on volumes moving through the pipelines. So December is going to be a tough month in terms of production. Hoping we can stay above that 1 million barrels a day, but a little bit doubtful on that. And you saw active wells drop. That was the stormy weather, and pretty much dropped in both the Bakken and the legacy type assets. Not too much to report with regards to rig counts and that, pretty flat. Interestingly enough, world crude storage and U.S. crude storage is approaching normal volumes. Something that really shocked me as I was getting ready for today's broadcast or webcast was the fantastic drop in natural gas prices at Watford City. We're down below $3 per MCF again. And I haven't had a chance to really discuss this with Justin, but we have a real situation where we've got natural gas oversupply in the Midwest. Storage is pretty full. It's within about 1 to 1.4% of the 5-year average. So there's lots of natural gas in storage, and we haven't had really severely bitter cold winter weather for extended periods of time. What's interesting is that, Europe is probably paying 40 times this amount. I don't know, 30 or 40 times this amount for liquefied natural gas to come in. And so we've got really a lot of incentive to try to find a way to get North Dakota natural gas out of the Midwest, to move it towards the Gulf Coast or the West Coast, so that we could do LNG exports. And so that was a pretty shocking number. And so we're at one of the highest oil to gas value ratios that I've ever seen. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on the whole flaring paradigm. Our publicly traded companies are very committed to reducing flaring and zero flaring, but the private companies aren't subject to quite the same requirements. And so that's going to put pressure on our flaring. Gas capture held very strong. I think we went from 95 to 94%. So we're still doing very well there. And the 4 fields that are problematic for us are still the 4 fields that are problematic, but those are the ones that midstream companies are working on. Turning to the federal government, We have filed new actions in our dispute with the BLM over quarterly lease sales. Took a look at what they have posted, on their website for nominations and lease sales. They don't plan on having a first quarter 2023 lease sale. So we've requested the federal courts to give us an injunction to try to move the BLM forward on this. And Judge Traynor has asked that unless somebody has a really good reason, he's going to combine our former mandamus request with this preliminary injunction request and move it forward to trial. We're back to the same games. We're back to 2016. BLM's come out with venting and flaring rules that are almost a carbon copy, a little less onerous than the 2016 rules that we managed to get thrown out in the federal courts. EPA is back with much more restrictive greenhouse gas rules. We're going to be commenting on both of those sets of rules after the Industrial Commission meeting later this month. And then, we're fully prepared to litigate because they are not progressive rules. They're not helpful. They criticize North Dakota for what we've done in the gas capture area. And yet we've gone from 64% capture to 95. So it's kind of hard to imagine that they would criticize our approach to that, but they do. And so my report includes information about how to comment on those new rules. Commission will be commenting, and North Dakota is prepared to litigate if those rules go through. I did see a question up ahead about DAPL. And so I can tell you, since North Dakota is a cooperating agency, the cooperating agencies are, it's anticipated that we're going to see a preliminary draft of the environmental impact statement 1st of February. And there'll be about a 30-day review period. And then it's likely to go public in early March. So you can anticipate seeing something there. I have no idea what it looks like, haven't seen it. We'll see it, like I said, when it comes out to the cooperating agencies, but I don't think you can rule out some kind of drastic action. So we'll have to wait and see. But the waiting won't be so long now. So that preliminary draft is supposed to go to the cooperating agencies early February and then be released to the public about a month later. So look forward to that. We think we're looking forward to it. Questions?
Yes. Jackie with the Bismarck Tribune asked regarding Senate Bill 2209 and Senate Bill 2212, the CO2 introduced bills. What impact would these bills have on the oil and gas industry if they were to pass?
So there's actually, there's two bills that potentially would impact the oil and gas industry. And then there's a third bill that would impact carbon capture and storage. So kind of talk about them as a bundle. But the two that Jackie referenced would both make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to build carbon dioxide pipelines in the state. And as I stated to the House and Senate Energy and Natural Resources committees and ag committees, we cannot do enhanced oil recovery without CO2 pipelines. So our existing CO2 pipeline required some eminent domain to get it put in place. That's likely to be required in order to build out the infrastructure that we need just simply for enhanced oil recovery. The impact of that would be North Dakota sacrificing potentially 10 billion barrels of oil that we expect would be recovered from enhanced oil recovery projects. There is one CO2 pipeline from one stationary source to the Canadian border. Even if we were going to use that pipeline, we have to build branch lines off of it. And that all of the carbon that we could capture in North Dakota represents only about 3% of what we need for enhanced oil recovery. So it would really tie the hands of the oil and gas industry in terms of enhanced oil recovery, and likely sacrifice many billions of barrels of oil. So pretty serious. I guess it's pretty obvious that we'll be testifying against those bills. The third one deals with carbon storage. And the whole point of that is that carbon storage and the current federal incentives are how the infrastructure to bring the other 97% of the CO2 that we need in the state to the state. So that infrastructure will be built on the backs of the 45Q tax credit, and carbon storage is how you get that 45Q tax credit. So it's a critical piece of North Dakota's future to get those billions of dollars worth of infrastructure built, because as I stated, we only have about 3% of the CO2 that we need to do the Bakken and legacy EOR.
Oh, I'm just following up on that, the existing line that goes to Saskatchewan. The contract for that is going to expire in a few years, correct?
Yes, the question from in the room was, what about the contract for the existing line from Beulah, North Dakota to the Weyburn field in Saskatchewan? That contract for that CO2 expires in about 3 years. And so it's unknown. That CO2 flood is more than 20 years old. It's very mature. And so it's likely that the contract volumes, if they're not eliminated altogether, will be greatly reduced. I think the second thing is that Canada has implemented a project called Boundary Dam, and they're actually capturing carbon dioxide off a major power plant that they have up there and sending it to Weyburn and Midale. And so that's a competing source of carbon dioxide, and it's got, Canadian tax incentives and all that sort of thing behind it. So that contract's going to expire, and those volumes will be reduced or eliminated, and that CO2 will become available. But again, it represents a very, very small percentage of what we need in the state. Anything else?
I've got a follow-up on that.
Go ahead.
Okay.
What was the name of the company that was bringing CO2 from Wyoming into Bowman County?
Thank you. So the question was about the imported CO2 that we're seeing. And so Denbury Resources is bringing CO2 from Wyoming to a field in Montana, actually two major fields in Montana, Bell Creek and then the Cedar Creek field. And then they're also bringing it across the border, and they started injections into Cedar Hill South Unit in June. And, once again, talking about amalgamation and unitization and all of that, Cedar Hill South Unit wouldn't exist without North Dakota's powers of unitization and amalgamation. And so we would have had tens of millions of barrels of oil lost if we had just drilled that field out and never water flooded it and never CO2 flooded it. So it's pretty short-term thinking to do away with those things.
Okay, we have another question here from Taylor. Is there any initial plan to help North Dakota gas production compete with production from the Anadarko or Haynesville for LNG to Europe?
Mm-hmm. So thank you, Taylor. I'm probably going to boot most of that question to Justin, but I know that there are designs on the table for moving North Dakota gas south and west. And there are some pretty major projects that are out for open season. And then also, Justin's been working the numbers on, as the gas that's closer to the Gulf of Mexico moves into LNG, what does that open up in terms of market volume for North Dakota gas? But he'll have more details on that. We do have an incredible disconnect between what you can get for 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas at Watford City versus what you could get at the Gulf Coast. And so it's going to naturally try to pull our gas, I think, to the south.
Yeah, I got it. This is gonna be out of left field. Driving here, I noticed that the price of the pump is $3.29 now, and just a couple of weeks ago it was $2.99. What is the nexus? Why is that happening?
Yeah, great question. The question from in the room was, with crude prices doing what they're doing, why is the price of gasoline rising? Even though, as we noted, crude prices were down about $5. And I think what we're seeing is even though our crude oil storage has returned closer to normal, the refined products is way behind, and we've had a significant number of outages and weather situations, and so we got out of balance where we've been restoring our crude storage, but we've been drawing down refined product storage, and so we're well below healthy inventories in the refined product area. In fact, kind of going into this diesel fuel, we were down to about a 25-day supply, and we're short of that now. I think we're closer to 3 weeks. So it's a low inventory situation in refined products. We good?
Yeah, I think the rest of the questions are for Justin. So we'll have Justin come up, and then you come up afterwards if anyone thinks of any questions.
Thank you, everyone.
You know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Justin Krinkstead, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. We'll get rolling into the production side of the world. Montana, last month when I had provided this update, they had 4 active rigs. They're now down to 3 active rigs, 0 active rigs in the South Dakota portion of the Williston Basin. I'm delayed on getting some updated numbers from Eastern Montana. Their website has changed, and some of the tips and tricks I used in the past, I'm going to have to rework finding some of that information. So then moving on to slide 3, we'll focus just on that bottom portion, that gas oil ratio. Obviously, that's one that now several months in a row where we've seen a decrease. I'm going to be digging into this a bit deeper, just given the consistency here over the last several months. One thing that my gut would tell me here as we look at the November numbers, when those November weather constraints came, it was largely in that southern half of the play got hit harder than the northern half. As well, during the month of November, we had some constraints on the northern border pipeline affecting, again, largely that southern portion of the play. And so when we look at the higher gas oil ratios, that McKenzie County, everything kind of south of the lake, the areas north of the lake that were less impacted, that still had access to Alliance Pipeline, maybe less impacted by both weather and pipeline constraints in November. So that may have influenced some of that gas oil ratio as well. But I want to dig into that. I don't like just using gut feelings. I wanted to find some hard data behind that. As we move to slide 4, we did see some shifting around in our oil movements out of the basin. We saw a little bit of growth in our rail movements out of the region, as well as a slight uptick in our movements north on truck up into Canada, either to get on a pipeline facility or into a rail car north of the border. When we look at the numbers here, the one that stood out to me is that blue dotted line. We saw that number go to $7 plus spread between Brent and WTI in November. And again, anything over that 5 to 6, that seems to trigger a bit more of a shift towards the rail out of the region, and a little less on pipe, and that is all came together with that higher spread and a little bit of a shift back towards rail movements. When we look at what refiners are paying, PADD 5, Pacific Northwest, the California refineries, highest priced market in the U.S. Those North Dakota barrels that we're leaving out on rail car, again, roughly a unit train per day, is the type of traffic we're seeing and heading towards, on slide 8, that Pacific Northwest. Now 80+% being estimated to move to pad 5, and then the remaining volumes going to that pad 1 marketplace. When we look at pricing here as of today, again, still continued strength in that Midwest market. There were some questions earlier to Lynn about refining and the U.S. as a whole over those late December storms, that cold weather that moved in. We saw challenges around the nation for refining runs. We saw a large portion of our refining capacity reduced as a result of that cold weather. That again, that pad 2 Midwest was not immune to that. We've seen in the last week's numbers from the EIA, percentages have upticked a bit. We're still not back at that kind of pre-winter levels for refinery runs in the Midwest. And so again, that's going to alter inventory levels and market dynamics. But at least for those Bakken barrels heading into that marketplace, continue to see strength, $2+ spread between WTI and those Bakken barrels. And then as you can look, again, that Brent WTI spread north of $5, kind of hanging right on that edge of what might start to influence movements out of the North Dakota area. This was that slight uptick. Again, nothing real out of the ordinary, but again, it was just a noticeable little uptick in those barrels moving north. Again, we don't have any clarity of exactly where those barrels are going, just that they are leaving the state and headed up into Canada on a truck. For the flaring numbers, the growth going from 5% in October to 6% flaring in November. That growth was exclusively in the flaring from connected facilities. So again, wells that had a pipeline connected to them, but they were not able to handle all the gas being delivered to them. And then on slide 12, again, that real strong downward trend and hovering for now almost a year in that 5 to 6% range, which is incredibly encouraging. Slide 13, not much to mention here. Again, we were in a good balance of wells getting connected to gas gathering versus new wells producing gas in the state. We did see some weakness in what the EIA was anticipating in their January outlook for crude oil prices. Again, now they're not seeing any dollar amounts on a monthly average in their short-term outlook. Nothing above 80, and then obviously dipping below $70 out towards the end of 2024. So they are seeing some bearishness in the marketplace here as we go forward. Natural gas outlook still strong, still working this to make sure that we've got adequate processing, but nothing major to announce here as far as any new project, greenfield or brownfield expansions or projects on the table that are public at this time. On our natural gas infrastructure, there are some questions I'll touch on here in a moment. That question about where North Dakota gas potentially would be heading. But at least as we sit here as of today, that market share on Northern Border is still hovering that 75% Bakken, 25% Canadian volumes. BTU numbers on Northern Border continuing to stay below 1,100, so we're not seeing, at least in the near term, any trigger events or things that would likely kickstart any discussions about whether or not North Dakota's gas needs to have any type of restrictions surrounding gas quality considerations. These are slides 19 and 20, just some references. If there were questions about the force majeure event, planned maintenance event as well, all in November, influencing again those volumes throughout Western North Dakota. And again, a lion's share of those molecules of gas are coming from south of the lake, and then some of the northern tier gas going towards the Alliance system. And I'll just use slide 21 to answer the question earlier about North Dakota's gas and that outlook. And Lynn had certainly correctly alluded to a couple of projects that are eyeing the Cheyenne market. You know, when we think about North Dakota's position in the overall North American U.S. gas dynamics, North Dakota accounts for about 3% of the total U.S. natural gas production. So it's a fairly small player. It's a large piece of obviously our industry and very critical to have solutions for it. When we look at from a U.S. perspective, North Dakota's volumes are going to continue to try to work and find their ways to some of these more macro level shifts that are taking place, particularly down in that Gulf Coast area, as we see LNG facilities continue to expand and come online. This year, we're seeing some weakness in natural gas prices. We're kind of stagnant in our LNG capabilities in 2024 and beyond. As some of those additional LNG facilities come online, that's going to shift the market even further and provide more strength towards that Gulf Coast market. So when we look at North Dakota's position going forward, especially in the 2024 and beyond time period with more LNG options out of the southern portions of the US, that will influence where those molecules want to go. So whether it's southern plays that traditionally we're trying to flow north or compete with Appalachian gas, we'll largely see competition where everyone's trying to figure out the quickest and easiest way to get to the Gulf, potentially providing some relief in some markets that North Dakota gas may be able to backfill and continue to feed parts of the country. Again, Midwest centric, looking at some of those Rockies as well. But again, North Dakota, we're not a market maker in the natural gas scene. We're largely continue to work and find markets that will be advantageous to us, given those shifting dynamics here going forward. So with that, that's the last formal slide I have, but I'd be glad to answer any questions from anyone.
I do have one.
Yeah.
And you mentioned some Cheyenne project.
Yes. Yep. So
What is that all about?
Yep. So for those of you online, the question was about the Cheyenne project. So there's two projects that are targeting the Cheyenne market. One is the WBI Grasslands pipeline. That is a roughly 90 million cubic foot per day project, which would connect North Dakota down to two additional pipeline systems.
Mhm.
Yeah, I apologize, Dave, if you're recording for radio here.
I think this slide is helpful.
I can manage.
Or here, I'll start at 16 and then I'll go forward. So there's a line, you can see that WBI Grasslands in the southwest corner of North Dakota, and it's a 16-inch line originally built to carry Wyoming gas north into North Dakota. As that Powder River gas largely dried up over the last number of years, that system provided an opportunity to be reversed. And so the project overall would reverse that 16-inch line, carry North Dakota gas down to two connecting Wyoming systems down to that Cheyenne hub. The second project, you can see the Bison pipeline on this map in yellow. Bison pipeline, a 30-inch pipeline that had the original purpose very similar to Grasslands, carry Wyoming gas north into North Dakota. It's been sitting idle for a number of years. And so that 30-inch line, the proposal from TC Energy is to reverse that project and move North Dakota gas down, connect up with two additional Wyoming systems into that Cheyenne hub. The time frame on the WBI Grasslands is much faster than the Bison project. The WBI system could potentially be in service late this year, early next year, with that 90 million cubic feet of capacity. The Bison project, significantly larger, 400 plus million cubic feet of gas per day. Timeline is much further extended on that one. That would require a full FERC 7C process. So the anticipation is that late 26, maybe down in that 2027 timeframe before that could move forward if they're able to secure the commercial commitments for it.
So just to clarify, the Powder River gas supply is kind of drying up or drying up.
Yeah. Yes.
So then the opportunities for Bakken gas to come down and serve a market like Cheyenne, Wyoming, or wherever it goes from there.
Yes, and so looking forward at that Cheyenne hub, once you get to Cheyenne, it's a fairly transparent marketplace where there's a number of options to either continue east, continue west towards again through the Rockies, heading towards that west coast. You can continue eastward on a number of different pipeline systems. So once you get there, there's a number of options that look largely attractive to those Bakken producers and those shippers that are looking for that next step in the solution chain.
Anything new on the proposed Bakken to eastern central North Dakota? Anything?
Yeah, so on the discussion surrounding, so it was was before our last press conference, but that December 15th, we did not receive any applications for that west to east pipeline concept. Again, it wasn't for a lack of interest from folks. It was largely constraints and limitations on users in that Red River Valley. And so it's largely held up on that front. I think we're going to need at least 2 to 3 major additional projects in that region of the state in order to get those discussions rolling again and what that might look like. So I know our Commerce Department and all folks in that Red River Valley are full steam ahead to find those projects. And I think there's a strong likelihood that those could come. And as those come together, certainly we saw strong willingness from the western side of the state to provide that gas. So it's still encouraging and folks are continuing to work it.
And will this idea of the 15-year break on ad valorem or property taxes, is that going to help?
Yeah, so certainly when you look at the economics, the distance that would have to be covered with a greenfield project, anything that's going to assist in those overall economic situation is going to help make that project more viable. So again, without knowing all the details, and it's going to depend upon all kinds of considerations, but yeah, the economics are at the forefront, challenged the way they are. And so anything that's going to assist in that discussion will be very helpful.
That's the only questions I have received.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.